Sterile Processing presents Issues and Challenges in Sterile Processing, a podcast conversation. This episode is the SPD, Foundations and Best Practices in Decontam. I'm Jason Marosi, Senior Educator for Sterile Processing.
And I'm Nancy Chobin, President of Sterile Processing University.
Well, Nancy, today we're going to tackle, I think, my favorite subject because I love Decontam. When I was a sterile processing tech, you couldn't keep me out of Decontam. I wanted to be in it every day.
I wish everybody felt that way in sterile processing. Unfortunately, I think some people use it as a punishment tool, which is unfortunate. And then it winds up affecting people like, I hate this job. And eventually it reflects in their work too. But yeah. I've said it many, many, many times. Decontamination is the most important part of the sterilization process. If they don't do their job, we're wasting our time in the rest of the department.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right. It's really looked at as a punishment. And it's funny because if you remember years ago, we had to do a video for a place we worked. Well, I can't remember why we did a video, but remember I did a video of each section. And when I got to Decontam, I played that country song, Take This Job and Shove It.
Yes.
Because that's really how the opinion is on sterile processing techs. This is always considered a punishment. And it's a punishment in their eyes because of the conditions, the gown, the gloves, the heat,
It's much more physical than that. For example, when you're in prep and packaging, you take a tray off of the washer rack or off of the rack where it's sitting, and you put it on the table. You're working one tray at a time. Whereas in Decontam, as they come in, you might have 10 or 12 trays come in. You have to offload that cart because they need it. You only have so many carts. And if it's a case cart, then you have to get it into the cart washer. So there's a lot of walking back and forth, a lot of lifting. And then you have to wear all the PPE, which has to be plastic-based or at least impervious to, the blood and body fluids. You have to wear shoe covers. You have to wear a head cover. And then you have all the heat coming out of all the equipment that you're using. So it's a nightmare. And, you can't have fans in sterile processing Decontam department. And, the temperature could be 72 degrees. But even at that, when you add the PPE and everything, so we have to recognize that we have to make it as comfortable for the employee as we can. And there's a lot of new products that have come out on the market. There's cooling vests. There are cooling collars. Some of these are reusable. Some of them are single use. You can offer them more frequent breaks just to get away from, the heat and humidity and rotate them. Some people will put somebody in Decontam for a whole week. That could be really, really challenging, I think. And again, I'm not talking about, when I worked in sterile processing, when I started 43 years ago, we did the little trays for ER. That was it. And, everybody did their own processing. And as the trays changed, we didn't change a lot of our practices. For example, with orthopedics, you could get, and we've talked about this in the Loner podcast, you could get 50 trays come in for one case.
Yeah.
And so you've got all this lifting, and it is exhausting to people. So it's really important that we recognize the importance of decontamination and making sure that the people who are working back there not only are knowledgeable, but have the energy in order to get the job done correctly. And we have the physical or environmental conditions there to support that.
Yeah, I can tell you all the years I worked in it, there were so many days when I took off my PPE, I was wondering if did I have a strike through from the water or was this sweat? Because I'd be soaking wet. You didn't even know.
Well, today we know because we're going to talk. We've talked about dress code in other modules, but I think we need to reinforce that today. That we have to be careful of the personal protective equipment that we're wearing in Decontam. There are still far too many places that are using those yellow isolation gowns.
Yeah.
Now they be okay on the floor, maybe, but not in decontam. We need a decontamination gown, and it has to have a rating on it as to the barrier qualifications. And the minimum barrier qualifications is a level 3 gown. If you're
Uh-huh.
working with total joints and cardiovascular thoracic open cases, you may need a level 4, like they use in the operating room, where you could be subjected to large amounts of blood or body fluids. But the minimum is level 3, and the manufacturers of those gowns are required to label their gowns with the level of protection they give. So it's really important that whoever is buying the gowns is told that they must buy a level 3 gown as a minimum for decontam.
Yeah. And I have to say, the materials management department has gotten very smart on that kind of things. And I really had, I can't even remember. I remember maybe like 10 years ago, I would have an issue if I brought that up. But now walking into materials and saying, yes, yeah, you need that. We know you need that. So that's really nice that you get the support now.
Well, it depends.
True.
Somebody has to tell that material manager, unless they went to a materials management conference and was given that information. It's the same thing with the yellow gowns. It's called an isolation gown, but it doesn't protect you. And I mentioned that I did a small study at one of my hospitals because they were wearing them. When I walked in, I said, "What are you doing?" "Well, we don't like the other gowns. They're too hot." I said, "You don't change the practice." So I went to the manager and I said, "You've got to know what's going on in your own department. The staff does not have the right to change the protective attire they're wearing." So I went in, and we had 3 employees working in decontam. One was doing the manual cleaning, one was doing the loading into the washer, and the other was taking the items off of the case carts. And so I had them take their gowns, and we put the gown up on, the bottom of the gown up on the counter. And I took maybe about 4 ounces of water and dumped it on each gown. And we timed it for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and 30 minutes. 10 minutes struck right through. 20 minutes, it was partially through. 30 minutes, it also went through. So these gowns did not provide protection for body fluids to go through. And that was a visual thing. I always found that when I did visual things, it really hit home with the staff.
Yeah.
So it's really important that we have the appropriate gown. Some people wear the aprons, the plastic aprons. You can't, because your arms are exposed. And again, they may be plastic, but then unless they're rated as a level 3, you're not going to get the coverage you need.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you really, coverage is important. That's an OSHA violation if you're not, covered.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you ever have this happen? I've worked at some places where the operating room was very nice enough to save all those surgical gloves they opened on the field but didn't use, and for decontam.
Yeah. Well, you could probably use them in prep and packaging.
But they're on the surgical field. These are, what I'm saying? They bring them in decontam because it was on the surgical field and they didn't use them. So you wouldn't bring them out of decontam, but they put them in there for you can use them and you can use it on decontam. And it's like, thank you. But then I got gloves in here that are not appropriate. And then that's what my staff is wearing.
Yeah. Well, that's also like when they get a tray that they didn't use and they send it down on the clean side.
Yes.
And they go, "We didn't use it." No, we don't know what you did. You could have touched that tray. Yes. And it's been completely open. It has to come back to decontam. So, there's some education, and I understand, the operating room is trying to save, in many cases, save time for us, but we've got to do the right thing.
So I guess we could really break it down to like why decontam matters. Like, what's the foundations and the whole science behind it?
Well, there is a lot of science behind it. We know that microorganisms are very prolific. They reproduce in 20 minutes. So if, say, for example, we have 1 million microorganisms on a device, if you leave that for 4 or 5 hours, because there is a time between the operating room and when it gets down to sterile processing, and then in sterile processing, we queue items. In other words, this tray came in at 10 o'clock. I do that as soon as it comes in.
Uh-huh.
And by the time I get to the trays that come in at 11 o'clock, it might be 1 or 2 o'clock before I get to them. So these items could be sitting there for several hours. Well, if you have 1 million microorganisms and they reproduce in 20 minutes, they double in size. I don't have a calculator in my head, but it's a heck of a lot of microorganisms that you're going to try and remove when you actually clean that tray. Mm-hmm. So the longer the tray stays unclean, the more the microorganisms are going to proliferate and be more difficult to remove. The more microorganisms that remain on a device because we did not follow instructions for use for cleaning, or because we decided we were going to take a shortcut because, hey, it's almost time for my break and I want to get this over with. Now we could potentially have left microorganisms behind. The danger with that is, and we have to take a little road trip over to sterilization now. When you think of sterilization, we'll talk about steam first. The method of kill is what we call coagulation of protein. And the best way to describe that, an egg is protein. You know, you have your yolk and you have your white, which is the protein part. Now, if you ever bought Chinese food and you ordered egg drop soup, what did they do? They took the raw egg, they put it in the chicken soup, and then you have all those strands of the egg. That's coagulated egg, okay? Now, can you take that coagulated egg and get it back into the liquid state? No, it's cooked. Okay. Yeah. Well, the same thing in the sterilizer. Once that protein, microorganisms are considered protein, gets into the sterilizer and that heat starts heating up the chamber, that protein coagulates. When that protein coagulates, the steam cannot penetrate through. So now you have protection over the microorganisms. And if the steam can't get there, you can't sterilize that part of the sterilizer. That's why you want to open your instruments for cleaning and open your instruments for sterilization to maximize this the exposure of the steam to the instrument. But the more we reduce the microorganisms, the lower the microbial count, the better the chance for effective sterilization.
Yeah.
And that's why now there's even a recommendation from AORN, and I hope we're going to put it in Amy, is that when you are removing instruments from the washer, make sure you have clean gloves on. And every time you change what you're doing in prep and packaging, answering the phone, going to the door, change your gloves or wash your hands thoroughly. Not the antibiotic, the liquid antiseptic. Wash your hands with soap and water, because we could recontaminate the instruments that we just cleaned. And that goes for items that come through on the pass-through window. So the better we clean, the better the chance for sterilization. So the two of them are married together. We can't have one without the other.
Yep. I'll never look at egg drop soup again the same way. That was such a good, I love that. So let's, I mean, you know, decontam, again, a very important subject, but, you know, especially the decontam room, but that's not where it starts. Where it starts is in the operating room.
Correct.
With point of use cleaning. So that point of use cleaning, which should be done in the operating room, everything should be opened up and sprayed. It should be in a closed container, cart, you know, usually a case cart. Smaller cases, some facilities will use like red biohazard bins.
Yes.
Like surgery centers.
There's a couple of things. Number one, we usually, even though it's part of the cleaning process, we call it pre-treatment, because believe it or not, there's some people, and it's been said to me, that they think that putting on the enzyme foam or gel is part of the cleaning process and they can shortcut that when they get to decontam. No, the purpose of treating with the enzyme foam or gel is to prevent these soils from drying so that it's easier for them to be removed. You know, once you have dried blood on something, it could take hours. And I think we we had some pictures. We should have included them for this one, of instruments that have sat there for hours and hours, and how long it took SPD to clean them. It's really unfortunate that that the operating room doesn't always understand their impact on sterile processing. If you look at the AMI and AORN standard on pre-treatment, they're supposed to open all the instruments in the operating room, disassemble multi-part items if indicated in the IFU, then treat them with the enzyme foam, because it does no good for them to put the enzyme foam if the instruments are closed, if they're strung, or if they're assembled.
Yeah.
So, that is their responsibility. They never had to do that before. And there was still a lot of pushback from a lot of operating rooms to say, look, we don't have the time. This isn't something that we're telling you we have to do. This is something we're telling you that your own organization, AORN and AMI, says we need to do. And there's a rationale for it. The sooner we get the treatment on the instruments, the less chance that the soils are going to dry, and that will make them easier to remove. Because again, there is a delay in the instruments being processed in Decontam because of the volume. Now, there's another little stoke in the fire here. I have some IFUs that now say this retractor must be cleaned immediately at the end of the case, or this item must be cleaned within 30 minutes of use. We have to communicate that to the operating room. We have to have some method for them to know that those items have to have special treatment. How we're going to do that, I don't know. You have to work that out at your facility. But if it's in the IFU, we have to comply with it.
Yeah, I mean, you brought up some really good, interesting points on this. One of the things I always had an issue with in Decontam is, you're right, the operating room will sometimes give you back your instruments where they're like lined up on the towel, like they had it for during surgery.
Oh, yeah.
But when they sprayed, all the instruments were closed, and then when you opened up the clamps, they'd be full of blood. And I would call, the operating room educator in most of the time and just say, hey, can you educate, because the spray didn't even touch the inside of the clamps, which is, this was a vascular case. It was really, very soiled. So that really, that's a big key. The breakdown process for the operating room needs to be taught. And I'll tell you an interesting story. I worked in a facility where we had really bad foreign object bioburden. We can't say, what it is now, but it was mostly bioburden, I would say. And we would literally start the day, the first cases. And let's say we were going to do open, this happened too. We had an open heart case, right? I had maybe 4 or 5 trays. The first tray, bioburden, toss to the side. Next tray, bioburden, toss to the side. Next tray, bioburden. We were canceling cases because we couldn't even get a clean tray to start. Wow. And we were doing everything. We were doing audits, second eyes. I even I took every staff person. I trained them in Decontam, side by side. I went and did, after I was done with that, I did inspection with every staff member side by side, every shift, documented everything. Everybody knew what they were doing. Nobody was doing a thing wrong, but we still kept on having bioburden. And this was getting so bad. Like I said, we were canceling cases left and right. Finally, I ran out of ideas to do in sterile processing. And I said to the operating room management, can I please give an in-service how to break down a table and pre-clean it and bring it to sterile processing? And they said, well, that's the only thing we didn't do, so do that. And then me and the educator, we went into an operating room. We put ketchup on instruments, made it all look bloody. And they filmed me as a surgical tech, breaking down, opening everything into the trays, spraying them appropriately, then bringing the case card to Decontam. We showed that at an operating room in service. The whole staff was like, oh, okay, this is what you want. Oh. I kid you not. 2 days later, our bioburden stopped immediately.
Wow.
It stopped 100%.
The process works.
Yep.
But everybody's got to do their job.
Both teams have to be online.
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then of course we have the transportation part, which is important.
Yeah, and that can vary by facility. For example, in a small surgery center, you probably just take the tray, put it in a biohazard container, and after it's been treated in the operating room, and then bring it to SPD, maybe on a cart or something. In the larger facilities, you might have a case cart system where you put them directly on the cart after they've been treated. But regardless of how you transport them, they have to be confined, they have to be contained, and they have to be in an OSHA approved container, meaning that it can be closed, it can be sealed, and it has an OSHA symbol on it with the OSHA coloring. You can only use an OSHA biohazard bag for something that isn't sharp. For example, maybe you have some basins that you want to put them in. If you have a rigid container, you can put the instruments back in the rigid container. However, then the container goes in a biohazard bag, unless the container is going on a case cart. Your case carts have to be labeled as biohazard, because I was actually at one of my own hospitals where Joint Commission came in and they saw all the case carts lined up, and they said, how do I know if it's clean or dirty? They said, well, there's a case cart form on the outside. No, they wanted to know, and they were right. So at that time, we didn't have the case carts that you can buy now that have a little sign that flips on it, clean or dirty. So we went out and we downloaded the OSHA biohazard symbol and printed it on orange paper and left them in the operating room. And when they put the instruments on the cart, they put that on the outside. And so if you walk down the hall, you knew immediately which carts were biohazard and which ones were clean. So you have to have a method of notification, because and this sounds crazy, but suppose those carts were out by the elevator waiting to go down, because not everyone has a dedicated elevator. And you have some salespeople or whoever is by the elevator, and they go, oh, I wonder what's in this cart, You think it's crazy, but people do crazy things. And they open it up and they get blood on them. You now have an OSHA violation. You're going to get sued up the wazoo. But if I have a sign there that says biohazard and they're dumb enough to go in it, that's their problem. So it's really important that, we have a method of identification of these carts, because that is the OSHA standard and we have to comply with it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget that Decontam's police is basically IFUs, AAMI, and OSHA. And AAMI, yes, is a standard and it's a recommendation. And I hear that a lot, especially from in the state of New Jersey, the AAMI was adapted into the state law. So you guys have to comply. In the other states, especially in the South where I am at, I've heard a lot of times, well, it's a recommendation, Jason. It's not, it's not, and it's still the national standard, as I would remind them. But all aside, there's still OSHA. And OSHA, you just don't, you can't say, yes, I'll follow it, or no, I won't follow it. It's yes, you will follow OSHA. That's, you have no choice.
You have no choice. Well, I still see a bunch of slides, and we could do the explanation. I still see people going to the big box stores and getting those nice plastic containers, slapping on an OSHA biohazard label. And no, that is not an OSHA approved. And I'll know this for a fact because I used to do that. I used to tell people in my presentations 10, 15 years ago, you have to have a container. It has to be labeled as biohazard. We didn't know that didn't meet the standards because we were wiping it out at the end. We thought that was okay. But one day, the way my mind works, I decided to call the two top makers of these plastic tote bins. And I said, how would I clean this thoroughly if I put something contaminated? And they said, we never designed these for that purpose. They're designed for clothes and stuff like that. And that's when I said, oh my Lord, and everybody's doing it. So there's still people out there. Just 2 months ago, one of my employees from SPU went into an ambulatory surgery facility. Every single container from Walmart had the little slap on it, the little biohazard label on it, and they thought they were doing the right thing. So you have to follow that standard exactly, and you have no option. But I just want to get back to the other thing you said about, the AMI standards being law in New Jersey, and we've discussed this in other podcasts. You know me, I'm a legal consultant, and I'm a freak when it comes to liability. In a court of law, if I said to you, Jason, why weren't you following the AMI standard? And your answer, because of your state, would be?
It's just a recommendation.
Right. So, in other words, the national standard that's developed by a group of experts and based on science that says that you need to do this and has been accepted as the national standard, which means the standard of care, you feel you don't have to do that because it was just a recommendation. So your patients aren't good enough to get the standard of care recommended by all the scientists and all the people on this committee. That's how it's going to be judged in a court of law. Here's the standard. They didn't want to follow it because it would cost them money. That's how it's presented to the jury.
And that's usually why it's said. It's because it's a money situation.
Exactly.
Any other time, if it doesn't affect the budget, then it's yes, do the AMI way. That's perfect. Go for it. Right. But the minute it costs money, it's just a recommendation.
Right.
Into some of our equipment and technology in Decontam.
All right. Can we just backtrack for a minute because this is a standalone one? I just want to finish the dress code. We talked about the gowns. Of course, you wear a head cover mainly to make sure that you're not getting hair or more contaminants in the tray. And the head cover has to be removed whenever you leave the area. The gloves are a big issue. I still see people wearing exam gloves or, surgeon's gloves that may be outdated or something from the OR. And, they send down these boxes of gloves. We're all for saving money, but that's not going to protect you. You need a glove that is a Decontam glove. It is a specific thickness to protect you. It should have the design where the fingertips have some traction on them so instruments don't slip out of your hand. And they should be at least 12 inches long. They do make some that are longer for like endoscopy where you're going to be in a deep sink, but you've got to have a Decontam glove. Also, the shoe covers. The shoe covers have to be water repellent. You can't wear the regular, there's shoe covers that almost look like a gauze material. I don't know how to describe it, but they're more for just, dust and stuff that might be underneath your shoes. Whereas the ones in Decontam do have to be water repellent. You don't want to get blood or body fluids on your shoes because you won't be able to get it out. So now in Decontam, you wear those shoe covers, you take them off every time you leave. So we have the gloves, we have the shoe covers, then we have the facial protection. That's a problem because what do we usually see in Decontam with that they're wearing for facial protection?
The mask that's usually used in surgery for the operating room with the mask with the shield that goes up.
Correct. So it has to be a fluid resistant mask like they wear in the operating room, but you should not be wearing the one with the shield because there is still potential for fluids, especially in Decontam. If something drops in the sink and you get a big splash, those fluids could come up over the top of the mask of the shield and get into your eyes, which actually happened to one of my employees. So make sure that you're wearing the appropriate PPE in Decontam. Safety glasses are not a substitute for eye protection. You have to wear a full face shield or goggles. So that concludes the dress code.
So real quickly with that, I've had a lot of techs challenge me on the face shield issue. And I try to remind everybody that they have the band up here that's blocking from any water coming. And I tell, they're like, oh, well, what about the opening here? And I said, that's why you keep your head down a little bit and it hits your chest. And if you're splashing, it's designed so that nothing's getting in. So that's usually how I end that debate. And I say where the other shield, there's nothing you can do. That part's open. And if it splashes up, you're going to get wet.
Well, if you have the head cover and you're wearing it correctly, it should give you some protection. And when it comes to this, if you have the gown on, there should be nothing there because your face shield's going to come down on the gown. Although some manufacturers make face shields now that actually come down like an accordion that will come down and give you additional protection. Whatever the issue is, they make it. You just have to purchase it.
Money.
Yeah. Okay. But we covered the dress code. So now we're in transportation. So I think we've covered that. We have the
Yep.
pre-treatment. We talked
Mhm.
about the transportation, and of course, timeliness is really critical. What about restringing the instruments in the operating room?
Well, yeah. So the restringing the instruments, there's so many products now. They get really wide and they're designed for free stringing, and a lot of operating rooms now make sterile processing use those stringers so that they can restring. It's a total mess, honestly, that subject.
Well, I have a solution. They shouldn't be restringing, because if they're
Mm.
following the AORN and AMI standard, they're supposed to open them all the way, disassemble the multi-part, and treat them with the enzyme foam, period.
Mm-hmm.
For us to expect the operating room to restring them, it tells me that the operating room does not have confidence in sterile processing, that they're going to have all the right instruments on that tray. It's the only reason I could think of. Why else would the operating room give themselves more work?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're under pressure to turn those rooms around because time is money in the operating room.
Mm-hmm.
So they should be able to just open them up so that we can make sure we get that enzyme foam or gel inside of all the nooks and crannies, and then get it down to sterile processing. Now, those that are doing it, it's going to prevent that enzyme from working the way it should.
Mm-hmm.
B, when the instruments get down to sterile processing, they have to disassemble them in order to clean them properly. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some people that still want to get their instruments and string them when they go through the washer. If they do, then they have to have stringers that are wide enough to keep the jaws of the instruments open. Okay, so you've taken the time to do that. You've strung them. There's a potential somebody could have an exposure while they're doing that, but that's what they want to do. You can only do it in certain washers, because certain washers have to be high enough, because those instruments have to be loaded so they're standing up vertically.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have the right stringer to keep them open, and you can't put them in the washer, then you've wasted your time. Now, another reason why you don't want to do it is when you get to prep and packaging, you have to unstring them so you can do your instrument inspection.
Mm-hmm.
So we're wasting time if we do it in the OR. We're wasting time if we do it in Decontam, and we're adding more time in prep and packaging. So to me, the best way to do it is to nobody string them. Open them up, keep them open for the whole process till they get to prep and packaging, so they can do their inspection and testing.
Yeah, because I'm gonna go back 6 years ago. I was working in a facility where we had 2 techs that were praised by the department in their decontam, because when they washed hand washed the instruments in the sink, they would restring it based on the count sheet and then put it in the washer. And wow. The staff loved them because when they got out of the washer, they didn't have to string their instruments. They just left them on a stringer, counted it real quick, and really gave it no inspection.
All right, and that's the whole point.
And when I came aboard, I was, of course, the evil one, because I immediately stopped that and said, you can't do that. But and I have seen that since then. So that's a new trend, and that's a really bad habit. You don't have the time in decontam to be restringing according to the count sheets. That takes a lot of time.
We've talked about that before, Jason, to some degree, that when we start changing our process because we don't want to take the time to correct the error, then we are at fault. If I know that the staff is having trouble with those instruments, then I, as the manager, either myself or get resources to train the people. First of all, can they read? That's a real problem today. Can they read, and is your count sheet accurate? Does it say 6-inch, needle holder, rider, gold handle, catalog number? You need all of that information. If they can read and your instruments have the catalog number on them, they'd be able to do that tray. But they need in-servicing. And some people want to take the quick and dirty, way out because, well, we don't have the time, we don't have the resources. That is your job. You are the manager of a department that's preparing medical devices. So it is your responsibility to make sure that everybody knows what they're supposed to do. And if they don't, that's on you. You have to take responsibility for that. And I'm not saying, maybe you don't have a strong background in instruments. A lot of us don't. If you don't, then get the resources. They're out there. You could have surgical instruments companies come in and do in-services. Get the OR educator to come in and do in-services. Videotape the in-services so that people who weren't there can go back and look at it. I'm the type of person, I videotaped everything. We didn't have a computer in every workstation like a lot of people have today because of tracking systems. But when we did have a computer out in the work area, I would put those videos there. I'll never forget, we had a new drill that came in that at that time needed Panis spray, which was the only lubricant you could use, and you had to do it a certain way. And I made an in-service on. I have never worked with this drill or this lubricant before. I did the policy. I did the in-service. We had it up on the computer. And one morning when I came in, one of my night people came to me and said, I'm so glad you had that videotape there because even though we had the procedure, it makes it so much easier to see it. And I was able to run it because it came down on their shift and they had never used it before. So, these are the kind of things that you have to do as a manager. Think outside of the box to help your staff.
Yeah. It's very important. That's the thing is a lot of managers also will do rounds, but the round for decontam is just to peek the head through the door going, you okay?
Yeah, exactly.
You got to get dressed to go in and see what's going on in there.
About 15 years ago, when tracking systems were just starting to take place or take hold, I had a dream of anything that had a very sophisticated or involved instruction for use. I mean, most of your basic instruments, Kelly's, Crowds, what have you, have the same thing from the same manufacturer. They're right in the front of the book. Pre-treat them, soak them in an enzymatic detergent, parse them in an ultrasonic cleanup, put them in a washer sterilizer. Okay. But we have many things that go on for pages and pages. And it really bothers me that people say, I'm following the IFU because I have IFUs that went on for 3.5 pages. I did this for one of my surgery centers. They did nothing but joints there. And they had 5 different vendors they used. And I did up a guide for them that they could post to Decontam. But I had said to them, I strongly recommend that you get a computer. And then they could just click on the manufacturer's name. The folder would come up. They click on the tray. And with a voiceover, they could listen and watch while they're doing it. It would be right over the cleaning area. This is what you do next. Take part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That to me is the ultimate. Would it take time? Absolutely. But you know what? Once it's done, it's done. And you don't have to repeat it. And I think that would be a blessing for anybody that can do something like that.
Yeah, that would be, I think in-servicing is very important in decontam. And I really think we need to get to the point where there's a video in-service on how to clean a tray and you watch it. I really, that's the best way to do it because nobody has time to read. It would be so nice for them to have a little screen that shows, how to clean it as they're doing it.
I could see the screen right over the sink. And you would click on, say, for example, it was a striker tray. Click on the striker file, then click on the tray that is part of striker, and it comes up. And it'll say, okay, now we're going to clean ABC tray. You're going to start with this, and it actually shows you the tray, and you could use a laser pointer and point to the different pieces. I mean, it's really, this is where we should be. We have to join. Our technology is still far below where they are in the operating room. When you think of what they're doing with robotics and everything, we've got to get with the program. And I know people are saying, well, we have AI now, it's coming out and it's going to help us identify defects in trays, you know what? I could see that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can't see AI picking up all the defects in trays if you want to use it as one method. But to me, there's nothing like the human factor to make sure that we're checking all the areas we need to check. How is that AI going to know all the steps in the IFU? But that's for another show.
Yeah.
But it's really important that they have that information where they could get it. And I think if someone would take the time to do it, I would start with your most sophisticated trays. That's everybody's nightmare. And how do you find out? Ask your staff. And look at how many which trays you're always having problems with. That'll give you a clue. I better start with these.
Yeah. So technology, again, that's the next topic on our list here, as we got to get into more of what equipment we have and what we do have. Like as you said, there's a lot that we could do better on equipment, but what we have is what we have. Again, a lot of hospitals, especially hospitals, you're going to walk in and their equipment can be 15, 20 years old.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Very
well, at a minimum, if you're meeting the instructions for use in terms of equipment, you have to have a 3-well sink, first of all. Soak and wash in the first, rinse in the second. That's the first rinse. Final rinse with treated water in the third. So people say, yeah, but I only have 2 sinks. So then you get a tote bin or a stainless steel bin and you label it as final rinse and you do the final rinse in that bin. Okay. You don't have to rip out sinks because you don't have 3 of them. If you remodel, then you put it in. So that's the first thing.
Also, real quickly, rinsing. There's a difference between rinsing and dunking.
Yes. When we clean, we have to know how much water is in the sink. Now, many people today use an automated system called a proportioner that automatically measures the detergent with the water. But how do you know it's working correctly? You have to have a method of identifying and verifying that you're getting the correct amount of detergent. Similar if you're using the gallon jug with the pump. If one pump is supposed to give you 1 ounce, you check your little glass that you're getting 1 ounce each time. And that glass should be wiped out after each use. If you get a buildup of detergent in the glass, you're not going to have the right amount of detergent. And you always should have a water level, because what happens if your proportioner goes down? You need to know. And I've had surveyors say, how do you know how much detergent you're putting in there and how much water do you use in your sink? Maybe you like the water level a little bit above halfway so that when you put the instruments in, the water level is going to go up a little bit. So there are water level markers that you can buy. They are adhesive back. You have to make sure as soon as they start to peel away that you remove them, that you clean off the adhesion and put another one on. Because anytime you have adhesive that has access to the solution, the microorganisms will get on that adhesive and you can't remove it. So they do cite you if they see that. When it comes to the rinsing, and this is something that most people are not doing, when the instruments come from the operating room, the very first thing you do is remove the enzyme foam. Well, what does that mean? You can't have water in your sink. That means you're going to be changing the water every time now. So when that instrument comes in, you're going to rinse off the enzyme foam, then fill the sink with the enzyme and detergent, new enzyme. Then after you wash it, you put it in the second sink for rinsing. Now, rinsing does not mean, as you said, plopping down. Okay. Rinsing should always be under running water, because if you take the tray and you have it in the water and you just put this tray in there and then you pull it back up, all the loosened debris has now just been redeposited on all the instruments. Instruments should be rinsed under running water. And that is, tap water is sufficient for that, as long as your tap, or what we call utility water, meets the new utility water standards for AMI ST 108. The final rinse is with treated water. Most people are using sterile distilled or reverse osmosis. And if you have that in your final sink, it's usually with a little white faucet to differentiate it. And you do the same thing there. The final rinse, your rinse water should never be reused. Never.
No.
And that's why if you rinse them under running water, you're not going to have that problem. So that's your 3-step manual process, and you need that equipment to do it. You should also have instrument air, not compressed air. Compressed air is for respirators. Instrument air is a special air that is very, very dry and oil and contaminant free. Again, so we don't recontaminate what we've just cleaned. And that should be on the final sink as well, to blow out lumens and things like that.
Yep, and also to have the corrective type of brushes needed.
Yes.
Any kind of, like, sometimes some companies sell the little guns that squirt pressured water through cannulas.
Air gun, correct.
Air guns, yep,
now,
yes.
Brushes is an important part also. You shouldn't be using brushes that you could get at the dollar store or Walmart. They were never designed to clean medical devices. You can get them from any vendor. Sometimes you have to use a specific brush. And if a manufacturer says you have to use brush 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you must use that brush because the manufacturer is telling you that's the only way that you can clean this correctly. Yeah, we have to buy it from them. However, there are some companies that do make generic brushes. And as long as it says in their instructions that this brush is the equivalent of ABC brush from the other vendor, then you can use it. Okay, but you can't just decide I'm going to use, a bottle brush or whatever I have. Now, are they single use or reusable? If you have both, you have to be able to identify them so the staff doesn't mistakenly reuse single-use brushes. And if they are reusable, they have to be cleaned after each use and sterilized at the end of each shift. And when we clean them, we want to hang them to dry. Well, where do I see them hanging? Right by the Decontam sink where they can get recontaminated.
Yes.
So find a place, over on the side, maybe by the clean sink, okay? But these are things that we have to think about when we lay out our Decontam area. So the air gun you mentioned, you could use that either for detergent or just air or for rinsing. You have to be very careful, though, with the air gun because there should be a pressure gauge on there because some things are sensitive to the pressure, and you want to make sure that you're not going to damage the item. Okay, so now we've gone through manual cleaning. Now, the next type of cleaning is mechanical cleaning. So let's say you're in a small surgery center or a large one, because we have a couple here, that only have an ultrasonic cleaner. Okay, so you follow the same steps: pre-treatment in the OR, rinse when it first gets in the first sink, then clean it thoroughly, then rinse it with your utility water, then it goes into the sonic. Now, let's say they're at the sonic. Let's start there. Have you read the user manual? What cycle do you give? Do you give whatever you thought you should give? Everybody uses 5 minutes. What does it say in the manual?
Yep. And that's a lot of people don't even know how to change their time.
Yep. And also you have to look at the IFU for the device cleaning. Maybe your sonic cleaner has a standard cycle of 5 minutes, but the device you have needs 10 minutes. You have to be able to change that and give it the 10 minutes and then put it back to 5 when it's done. Did you check the water quality? We now have sonic cleaners that want you to use distilled water.
Yes.
Not utility water. Do you know that you have to change the frequency? You have to change the water frequently based upon the type of instruments you're processing. Now, if you're doing, say, for example, plastic surgery or minor cases, you probably could get away with changing the solution in the sonic cleaner 2 to 3 times after 2 or 3 uses. Again, that's why you clean them first. You never put anything grossly soiled in the sonic. However, if you're doing, you have a large sonic cleaner and you have heavy volume instrument and heavy trays, like orthopedic trays, you're going to change that water after each use. So you need that in your policy, and everybody has to be following it. Now, when those instruments are done with the sonic cycle, they then get the final treated water rinse again, because again, you have detergent. We have learned that by not taking the enzyme foam off when they arrive, rinsing them after they've been manually cleaned with the tap water, and rinsing them again after the sonic cleaner before they go in a washer, we can have a buildup of the detergent. And remember what we just talked about, when it goes in the sterilizer, it would heat up that detergent, and now the sterilant cannot penetrate through that detergent and result in not only a sterilant failure, but a disinfection failure if you're going to high level disinfect it. So the rinsing now has really come to the forefront as being really, really important. So now, if that's the end of your step, you're going to put on gloves, because remember, ultrasonics don't decontaminate, they just clean. And then prep and packaging will wear gloves, because they should anyway when they're prepping that tray. The final step would be, if we go as far as the sonic, we're still going to rinse them with the utility water. And then, because we're going into the washer, it doesn't have to be rinsed with the RO water, because it's going through another process. So after the sonic, you can rinse them with your tap or utility water, and then they go into the washer. That's because your washer is supposed to have a final rinse with the treated water, RO or what have you. So that is your process for manual, only ultrasonic, and the 3-step process where it'd be cleaning, ultrasonic, and washer. And there could be no deviation on that unless it's in the IFU.
Ultrasonic, because I think this is a really important part to talk about. The amount of ultrasonics that you have in your department. Because I've worked at some places where we have like 15 operating rooms. We do neuro, spine, ortho, general, everything. We do everything under the sun, open heart. And I got one ultrasonic.
Oh, then there's no way you're following IFUs.
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. And if it's working.
I have to tell you, this was my complaint for years. I contacted all the major sterilizer manufacturers who also make Decontam equipment. I said, why can't you come up with a multi-level sonic? I'm so sick of this. And we don't have room in our departments to have 8 or 9, and became really critical with all the IFUs for orthopedics. Because when we first started getting IFUs for orthopedics, believe it or not, there were some trays that had 20 and even 45 minutes of sonication for one tray. Wasn't getting done. Okay. So thank goodness about, I guess it was maybe about 10 years ago, they finally listened. And we now have sonics that will do multiple levels. The caveat is they all have to have the IFU for the same amount of sonication, which thank goodness today, most IFUs are the same. But you have to make sure that there is a way for you to adjust that. The one other thing I do want to address is degassing the sonic cleaner. That is not an option. Now, some of the newer units automatically degas as soon as you start it up. You don't have to touch it. Others, you have to push a button. But in order for the degas cycle, you have to put an empty perforated tray. You never want to run your sonic empty, because the sound waves could damage the sides of the chamber. And then you would run a cycle. And then the third way is that you have to do the cycle yourself. In other words, you have to set it for 5 minutes, and you have to put the tray in. There's not a button that says says that this is for the degassing. I would strongly recommend that you have a form, several forms of Decontam. One to document the detergent lot number and expiration date, because I have been on cases where people use detergent that we found out was expired. You want to document that you did how often you change the water. If your policy is every 3 changes, document that on a log form, as well as who did the degassing and when. All of this can be subpoenaed in a court of law. And especially if there's a complaint about bioburden on trays, that this information is going to be asked for. So those are important pieces of documentation for Decontam.
like I said, when you have one ultrasonic and you have 6 washers, realistically, you should have at least minimum of 3
No,
ultrasonics.
there should be one for each washer.
One for each washer,
My
yeah.
opinion. One for each washer, because if one goes down, this is the thing that kills me about SPD. They never allow for duplication.
Yeah.
So you have one sonic and it goes down, you're dead in the water. What happens? You have any infections during that time? You're in deep trouble.
I've been in that situation where I've had one and it broken more than it was working.
And I mean, there's no way you could say that your cleaning was going to be the equivalent, because you're not complying with the manufacturer's instructions, especially if they say to sonicate it. So I always plan for 6. Now, if it was a new department, that was a different issue. But today, because of the multi-levels, we could do 3 or sometimes 6 trays.
Yes.
And they don't take up as much space as the big ones we used to have. Then it is feasible, and you really need to plan for it. You really do. There's nothing more important. As a matter of fact, when I design sterile processing departments, I always pay attention to decontam, because I tell them, all right, if you're going to give me 4 washers, I want the ability to have 2 more washers added. Do the piping, do the drains now, because you're usually on the basement level and they have to jackhammer everything up if they have to add equipment. If you're on an up top floor, it's even worse, because they have to vacate who's below you to add them. I always put in the additional piping for extra washers, and I put in piping for additional sterilizers. If you never need them, fine. But if you do, it's simple. You just order the sterilizer and hook it up. Everything's there.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you redo your department, you got to realize you're going to do it again in another 10 years, probably. Everything is always, population grows, services grows. So I got one more quick question for you for ultrasonics, and I know this one is going to get you going. If I was a sales rep and came to you and said, Nancy, I got this wonderful brand new washer that has the ultrasonic built into it, and you don't have to have it because it's in my washer, what are you going to tell me?
I'm going to tell you that I like each process separately, because if that washer goes down, I've lost everything now. That reminds me of when we had the tunnel washers.
Yes.
And they took up a lot of space. They were very expensive. They really did not do a good job, but they were sold to us on that basis. Oh, you just put it in and it's like a car wash. You don't have to worry. We couldn't adjust the sonic time or anything. I do not like things that do. I was always told when I first got married and I was trying to buy all my equipment when we built our house, and they said, the more whistles, the more the thing can go wrong. And so I always said, I want it to do what it's supposed to do, and that's it. There's certain things that you can take shortcuts. You can't take shortcuts on cleaning. It's going to come back to bite you. Might not come back right away, but sooner or later it will.
Can tell you, when it's a new product, let it be on the market for a year or 2 before you purchase it. Let somebody else purchase it and find out.
I also called them about, I've called people and they said, oh, this is wonderful. And I'm going, I don't think they ever worked with it.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's another thing, as a manager, the company will usually take you to 2 or 3 hospitals and show you the equipment and take you out to lunch. And that's their job. But that doesn't impress me. I have a form where I will call. So give me a list of hospitals that have your equipment, and I'll select who I'm going to call. And I'll ask them, how do you like it? Was it worth the money? Is your staff happy? Are they able to use it easily? Is it difficult to operate? We talked about having those manifolds where you could attach the lumen cleaners. Nobody touches them.
They're dusty.
15, 20 years ago, they were $10,000. Who knows what they would cost today? Yeah. You have to buy something that the staff is going to feel comfortable with. And if you don't allow them to try it and see it, then you're doing them a disservice. Yes, you're going to be making the decision, but you've got to include them. They're the ones that are going to be using it. So when you go on those site visits, select one of your employees. And of course, that could be another issue. Why does she get to go? But that's a whole nother show. To come with you and, where they can talk. technician to technician. How do you like it? How easy? And they could look at it and they'll be able to give you input into it. There is nothing worse than paying these thousands and thousands of dollars for equipment and then it's not used.
Yep, exactly. I want to thank everybody for this hour. Please like, subscribe. Look forward to part 2 of this, where Nancy and I will finish into the mechanical washers and finish up in the decontam section. So I hope you enjoyed part 1.
Thank you.
To receive your free CEU approved by the SPD and HSPA, go to www.spdceus.com. Watch the entire program on the Sterile Processing University websites, and you will be emailed a free 1-hour CEU. Thank you.